Nathan Coffey. I'm originally from Leavenworth, Kansas. I was in the U.S. Navy, and I served at NAS Lemoore, or Naval Air Station Lemoore, and I was attached to Strike Fighter Squadron 113.
Awesome. And then, so if you would, tell us where you're from and where you were raised and kind of how you came to join the service.
Yeah, so like I said, I was born and raised in Leavenworth, Kansas, traditionally a very Army town. So the decision to go Navy was actually kind of a natural choice for me, kind of growing up right outside of Fort Leavenworth. Kind of get tired of seeing green, kind of wanted to see some blue. Plus, both of my grandfathers were in the Navy. One was an electrician's mate on a destroyer in the Korean War, and then the other one was a Seabee right at the end of World War II on Tinian.
So, did you join right out of high school?
No, so I actually joined in 2006, and I graduated high school in 2002. I kind of bounced around to a couple different jobs. Didn't really have a lot of direction. Knew that, especially after 9/11, I knew that at some point I was likely going to join the military. There's always that hesitation that, can I actually do this, kind of a thing, and then you just kind of have to just take the step and go for it. So when I was 22, I enlisted in the Navy and got entered into their delayed entry program. So even though I signed my paperwork in May, I didn't actually leave for basic training until December of 2006.
What was it that got you to that point where you're like, all right, I'm ready to do this?
It is a combination of many factors. The first one being, I always felt, why should anybody else die for me when I'm perfectly capable of serving myself? I didn't need any special waivers. I had no medical problems. I was a perfectly healthy human being, and I didn't really see the point in anyone else serving, when I didn't. So that was a big driving factor, and then also the family aspect as well. Not only were my two grandfathers in the Navy, but my younger brother was also a U.S. Marine serving at the same time. So that, and there were some financial issues too that I needed to get in front of. So that enabled me to do that.
Did you know prior to going in the Navy what you wanted to do in the Navy, or just kind of walk in there blind? And
I knew I wanted to do something with either firearms or explosives. I didn't want a desk job. I didn't want to be a cook. No offense to those folks. It takes a special person to do each job. I just didn't have the mindset, and I didn't have the attention span to sit at a desk all day and push paperwork around. I wanted to actually do something active. So when they offered me aviation ordnance, I snapped at it pretty quick.
So you join the service out of Leavenworth, you go through MEPS, and you ship off. Mm-hmm. What's next?
So get through basic training, graduated in February of 2007, went to Naval Air Station Lemoore, or Pensacola, in Florida, for my A school, or basic job school, I guess you could say. That lasted, till around July of 2007, and then I took a couple weeks leave, and then reported to C School, or my advanced job school at NAS Lemoore at the school center there, before checking into my squadron in September of 2007.
So tell me what it was like when you get to basic training, and you're you're a kid off the street, you don't know what's going on. Like, what was that like?
Thankfully my recruiter was actually a good guy. He really set me up for success with that. You'd see people bringing in bags of clothes and things like that, and the first thing they have you do is take off everything you owned that's civilian, everything you brought aside from any money or any identification, a social security card, that kind of thing. They put it in a box and they ship it off, and then they start issuing you new clothes. So I was kind of already prepared for certain things. The initial shock of not even making it off the bus and already have someone screaming at you. I'd already been kind of prepared for that, so it wasn't that big of a culture shock for me. It was the days and days and days of that kind of affected the physical aspect, the mental aspect of it, and really made you have to focus on the task at hand and attention to detail under duress, whether that be vocal, emotional, physical, whatever.
So you get to your unit. Where was your first unit?
The only squadron I was ever attached to when I was in the Navy outside of schools was Strike Fighter Squadron 113, or VFA 113 in Navy terms.
What's VFA stand for?
Strike Fighter Squadron.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the V is the squadron, and then the F or the A is strike or fighter squadron. And since the F-18 Hornet is technically a strike and a fighter at the same time, the squadrons are now VFA.
What does the Strike Fighter Squadron do as a whole, and then what is your role in the squadron?
So as a whole, the squadron is in charge of part of an air wing, carrier air wing, or a CAG, CAG acronym. They are in charge of running close air support and combat air patrol for ground forces, ours, allies, whatever good guys need support from the air, we're there. So that's our primary function. And then my function within the squadron was as an aviation ordnanceman. So I loaded bombs, missiles, 20 millimeter high explosive incendiary rounds into the F-18 Hornet.
So you brought some stuff with you.
Yeah.
If you would just hold those up and kind of tell us what those are.
So this is an example of a 20 millimeter shell.
Mm-hmm.
It would extend about that much further out of the shell itself would be the actual round. And then packed inside was high explosive incendiary. It's almost like more potent gunpowder, just little tiny pellets, but there were thousands of grains of it in this. And the gun system on the F-18 is pretty capable. It's 4,000 rounds a minute on the gun low setting, and on the gun high setting, it's 6,000 rounds a minute. But the capacity of the actual ammo drum itself is only 548 rounds. So you would set a rounds limiter switch to every time the pilot pulled the trigger, it would only fire off 100 rounds, which would take less than a second. That way he wasn't going through all 500 rounds all at once.
That would probably keep it from overheating as much too, huh?
That too, yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And what was the other object you had?
This other object here is part of a what's called a Mark 122 safety switch. This little piece here on the end, this would actually interrupt the circuit for smart bombs. And as soon as it was dropped, this lanyard here is shorter than the coaxial cable that provides power from the jet into the smart bomb itself and power. So as this drops, this is shorter, so it would drop, and then right about here is when the circuit would be completely open, and then it could actually receive that power, and all it takes is a split second, and then it breaks away from the coaxial cable and then onto whatever target is being lased by ground forces.
So the size difference in ordnance you're describing here is significant, right?
Yes, anything from that little, and I say little, it's probably not little compared to other types of ordnance that other people are used to seeing, all the way up to 2,000-pound bombs and 3,000-pound landmines, things of that nature.
So for you, the loading procedures for these are going to be a lot different, right? So what's it like loading one of those huge pieces of ordnance like a bomb?
So for a 500-pound bomb, you need 4 loaders. You need someone to ensure that the bomb rack is locked, and then you need a quality assurance safety officer, or QASO. For a 2,000-pound bomb, you need 6 loaders, and then also the other person to make sure the bomb is loaded up correctly and the bomb rack is locked, and also a QASO. Anything above 1,000 pounds requires and I'm blanking on the name, a lift basically to winch it up. Mm-hmm. And there's a different hoisting gear for each bomb, and each bomb has its own setting on certain gears. So it's a pretty extensive job. It does take quite a bit of technical know-how, aside from the physical aspect itself of actually hand loading ordnance up to 1,000 pounds.
What does a typical workday look like for someone in your career field?
So if you're at your air station, so you're not deployed, you're on land, which is going to be, if you're on the West Coast, it's going to be Naval Air Station Lemoore, and if you're on the East Coast, it's going to be Naval Air Station Oceana, Virginia. That's kind of how they're parceled out, and then the Marines have their own F-18 squadron bases, kind of located sort of in the same areas. So if you're day check, your day starts at 7 a.m. You get there at 06:30. Get the plan of the day, get the flight schedule, start getting all the gear that you need to load for the flight schedule itself. Then there's a FOD walk down of all hands. FOD meaning foreign object debris. So that's anything larger than a speck of dust that's metal in nature, or anything that could potentially FOD out an engine or ingest something in an engine that would make it not work in midair. And then after that, then we'd start actually loading for the flight schedule itself. And depending on how many were on the first sortie or the first mission of the day, if we were, like I said, if we were ashore, 45 minutes to an hour. Because once we load, then we have to go back and do our safety checks and make sure that everything is loaded correctly. We call that walking the jets. So once that's complete, then we turn it over to the pilots and the plane captains, which I was also a plane captain before I went to the ordnance shop. Turn it over to them for the pre-launch and the launch procedures. And then recover them as they come back. We never, unless we were on a det to, say, Naval Air Station Fallon, which is where Top Gun is now. It's not in Miramar, California. It's in Fallon, Nevada. Unless we were there, or maybe in El Centro, California, we were only flying with inert ordnance. So that's practice ordnance. It's weighted exactly the same. It's got the same active features on it. So it's got real guidance fins. It's got real laser guided or laser seeking nose cones, things like that on the bombs. The missiles function exactly the same as they would, just they don't have a rocket motor and they don't have anything explosive in them. So that's what inert ordnance means. And we'd fly those only, like I said, only if we were on deployment or on det. But if we were in NAS Lemoore, we were actually flying inert ordnance. And if there was a separate sortie or mission later on in the day that was going to be flying something different but on the same jets, when they came back, we'd have to download that and then upload any extra ordnance for the next sortie itself. And then just kind of rinse, repeat until night check comes in, typically around 17:30 or 5:30 at night, and then they work until whenever maintenance control decides to let them go for the night. It's not uncommon for night check and mid check to work well past daylight hours, just kind of depending. So if you were on day check, you definitely got the easier schedule for sure.
I think a lot of people think that if you're in the continental United States and maybe, so let's use your job for example, you're loading ordnance, that's probably that it's going to be mostly inert. But would you guys load quite a bit for combat missions that are going to take off from here and go overseas?
So we aren't basically transcontinental jets. If we ever do any actual missions overseas, we're deployed on an aircraft carrier itself. So unlike some of the Air Force intercontinental bombers, so like the B-1, the B-2, we aren't transcontinental like that. We're shorter range, so we're anywhere in the 8 to 12 hour window of time there for pilots actually being in the cockpit. We do obviously have mid-air refueling capabilities, but we don't have the long range necessarily. So
you were in the same squadron the whole time, but so
Correct.
Would you go back and forth between being deployed on a ship or carrier
Yes.
or vessel or?
Yeah, so our deployments were anywhere from 4 to 9+ months. In the 5 years I was in, if you subtract about 10 9 or 10 months for schools and training, that kind of thing. The 4 years, 2 months I was in, I did about 2.5 of that at sea, and that's actually on deployment. That's on workups to get ready for deployment. That's everything all rolled up into one. So, yeah, it kind of wears on you, the operational tempo. Even when you're home, you're still training, you're still working long hours, you're still making sure that the jets are up or functioning or flight worthy. We call that up jets. So our main focus as maintainers is to make sure that the jets are up at all times, or as many as possible.
So if there is a typical day, what would your typical day look like when you're on, is it aircraft carrier? Is that what you're on?
Yeah, aircraft carrier. So the 3 deployments that I was on, my first one was with the CVN 76, the USS Ronald Reagan. And then my last 2 deployments, we switched carrier air wings to where we deployed off of the USS Carl Vinson, or CVN 70. The CVN is a conventional carrier, nuclear powered, and then the whole number is 70 or 76. So that's how we kind of differentiate between what's what there. So if you're day check, your day starts at 06. That means you're up at 05 or earlier if you wanted to work out, get breakfast if it's ready and available. Go upstairs, relieve night check so that they can come down and get their breakfast or supper, and then start prepping for the day itself. And then right around 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, you have XO's happy hour. Basically, you clean the ship. So each department, each air wing, each shop in each air wing, everybody's got their own particular compartment or compartments that they're responsible for cleaning on a daily basis. So for 60 minutes, even if your compartment is only a 20 by 40 space, you're cleaning that space for an entire hour, whether it's dirty or not. And unfortunately, that's just kind of the way it is in the Navy. We are our own janitors as well as all the other duties as assigned. So once XO's happy hour is over, and then we can do the flight schedule. Very rarely would a flight schedule interrupt that cleaning hour, but occasionally it would, just kind of depending on what the operational tempo was, where we were, what we were trying to accomplish for that day or that week. If we were typically off the coast of Pakistan, about 200 miles, and then our jets would fly in over Pakistan airspace. They would refuel. They would get on station somewhere, wherever their locations were supposed to be over Afghanistan. They would then basically just fly in big circles for 3 or 4 hours until someone needed assistance. So that would be either combat air patrol or close air support, depending on how the loadout was. There's 4 F-18 squadrons per air wing, with about 10 to 12 F-18s per squadron. So each squadron, even though they might fly in the same sortie or the same mission, they're going to have different responsibilities. So depending on what their responsibilities are, depends on what loadout they have or what ordnance they're carrying itself. Once they get relieved by another incoming flight from our carrier air wing, they would then kind of do the same thing in reverse. They would mid-air refuel somewhere over Pakistan, and then fly out to the boat for landing. So they could be gone for our entire day shift. They take off at 11, 12 o'clock in the afternoon, something like that. They might not get back till 10, midnight, just kind of depending on how far they were in country. So those were great days if you were an ordnanceman, because especially in day shift, because that meant all you had to do was load out for the different sorties for that day, and then kind of maintain your equipment, kind of do those type of checks and balances and maintenance. Always maintenance to do. So if you're night check, your day starts at 1800 or 6 o'clock at night. So you're up. If you can sleep, you're up at around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, getting dressed and whatnot. Hopefully get some supper, exchange pass downs with day check, what they accomplished, what still needs to be done, and then you're having a stand up with maintenance control as well at night. That also happens during the day too. All the supervisors of all the shops go to maintenance control and they see what's on the flight schedule for that day, what jets are down for maintenance or what jets are up, that kind of thing. Just kind of get everybody on the same page for that shift and for that day. And then there's a third shift that not a lot of people know about. It's called mid-check or IWT, Integrated Weapons Team. And in every F-18 squadron, there's an integrated weapons team. And the function of those sailors is to make sure that the weapon systems on the jets function as they're supposed to. So they are, we call them wire checks. So they're checking all the different launchers that we would use, simulated launchers that we would use for different missiles, checking the bomb racks to make sure that they release as they're supposed to, making sure all that stuff is good to go. We typically would have 2 to 3 jets per night, and then they would just cycle every 7 days. So some days we would only have 2, and maybe one of those was down for a wash job. So we would just push that one on to the next night or however need be. So my third deployment that I was on, my last one, I was the aviation ordnance guy for the IWT team. So I worked that weird shift. I worked 2200 to 1000 every day when I was deployed. So that's 10 o'clock at night to 10 o'clock in the morning, roughly. A lot of times we would work over just to help out. And then for the IWT team, when we're back on shore, those hours are significantly different. We're working usually 2 o'clock in the morning until 11, noon, or 1 in the next day. So pretty difficult hours to get used to. Very rarely do they give you a lot of time to adjust your schedule. A lot of times it's you go in and they say, hey, Coffee, you are going to be night check, so go ahead and go back home and try to get some more sleep and come back and clap hands with day check. And so that's it. Then you're working night check until you come in one night and they say, hey, you're going to be day check tomorrow, so go back to your rack or go back to your apartment or whatever, get some sleep and come back in the morning. Very rarely do they give you enough time to really adjust and adapt. So that's where a lot of the sleeping problems come from for a lot of Navy guys.
Do you ever get a day off when you're on the carrier?
Only when we're in port. So we make certain port calls in certain countries. Typically they're more diplomatic focused. My first ever foreign port was actually Hong Kong. So that was an experience in and of itself. It was we were in port for 4 days, but you have a duty section, so you have duty one of those 4 days. So you really only get 3 days of time off the ship. And if you're a lower rank like I was and new to the Navy, they wouldn't let you stay out overnight, and typically you had to be back by midnight local time, or you'd get written up or have to go to some disciplinary review board or something like that. It just depends on when those port calls are scheduled. It could be 2 months, 3 months in between port calls, in which case there is no such thing as a day off in the Navy. Even no fly days, those are your heavy maintenance days. Those are when you're catching up on cleaning the jets, cleaning the equipment, making sure the bomb racks and stanchions and everything are fixed and all that good stuff. So that's really the only time you get a day off is if you're in port. So it just kind of varies as to when that's going to be.
What are the living conditions like on the aircraft carrier?
So most berthings, as they're called, or rooms in civilian speak, berthings are 90-man or 90-person berthings. So most squadron folks get the worst berthings because the ship's company, that's their home. The ship is their home. So they typically get the better of the berthings. So you're just kind of left with whatever is left. So you get what you get. There are 3 racks or beds stacked on top of each other, and they're called coffin lockers because you sleep on the mattress, and the mattress is on top of your locker area. So it's like basically a twin bed, or it's a little bit shorter than a twin bed and a little bit more narrow than a twin bed. They call it a coffin locker because the mattress itself, you can raise it up, and then underneath is all your little sections for your clothes and everything. So you're supposed to fit a whole deployment's worth of clothes and any personal items in that little bit of space, or in your floor locker, which I believe there's 12 to a stack, and they're about that narrow, about that deep. So it's not much space to pack an awful lot of uniforms and clothes. So they were very cramped, is what I'm trying to say.
What's the food like?
Pretty terrible. Whatever you've heard about Navy food being good, don't believe it. Maybe the submarine food is better, but you'd be lucky to get a powdered egg omelet on a Sunday that wasn't warmed over. Mid-rats was especially the worst meal for sure, because the Navy in the military in general, only budgets for 3 meals a day, and that fourth meal, or mid-rats, is going to be your lunch for the mid-checkers and the night checkers, and that's going to be leftover food from the previous 3 meals. So if you don't get in right at the very beginning of chow call, 9 times out of 10, I ended up with rice, noodles, and some stale syrup. And that's not really an exaggeration, unfortunately. Just kind of also depended on what supply line you were on. So if you were in the Middle East, you were getting whatever supplies were available to military personnel in the Middle East, as well as some civilians in the Middle East. So the food could be very different, just kind of depending on what supply line you were part of.
So when you deployed, it sounds like you're kind of in the same regions every time, right?
Correct, yeah.
So were you in support of the same units on ground, or?
That would just kind of depend on the units on the ground. I'm not sure. I'm not super familiar with the operational cycles of the ground forces, but we would typically operate, like I said, about 200 miles off the coast of Pakistan and just support whatever region needed support that the Air Force wasn't able to cover. So typically the southwestern regions of Afghanistan was typically what we would cover, because that was doable for our aircraft. So whatever ground forces were there at the time is who we were supporting.
How often were you aware of what was going on the ground from where you were and on the aircraft carrier?
You get news briefs every once in a while if something significant happens. The captain of the ship comes on once a day and just kind of makes some general announcements. And if anything, if he felt like there's anything we really needed to know, we would say, he would say it. Otherwise, we still had access to some TV channels, so there was always updates and whatnot going around. And then occasionally you'd have internet access, outbound internet access, so you could kind of see what was going on in the world outside of you. So yeah, it wasn't that difficult to keep up on current events per se, but it just kind of depends on what condition of, they call it River City. That's basically what level of security that they're at for outbound communications, and that's outgoing email as well as outbound internet access.
So you guys wouldn't necessarily get like read in on specific mission stuff for this. So
our pilots would. If there was a significant operation going on, our pilots would be brought into that. So there was nightly code changes that the avionics technicians would grab from the secure location in the ship, and then upload those to the jet on a daily basis. And those are radio codes. Those are all the way down to what pulse frequency are you going to be painting targets with a laser designator on the ground, and we would match that on the ship or on the birds or jets, so that we were dropping the ordnance in the right spot.
What was your favorite thing about being in the service, or like, 'cause you get out and there's a lot of bad reasons that's why you get out, and a lot of good reasons that you remember. But what was,
The people. There, because a squadron is a fairly small command. I think our operational strength was supposed to be around 225, 200, something like that. We were regularly undermanned, so we had to rely on each other to get things done. And typically, you were doing 2 or 3 different jobs every shift, every day, kind of thing. So, you meet some extraordinary people, and then under some circumstances, you meet some people that you really don't get along with, and the circumstances might exacerbate that a little bit more until there's some real friction. But that's standard. That's really any deployment. It's just when you're on a ship, even as large as an aircraft carrier, it gets a little smaller every day. So even though there's 4 acres of flight deck upstairs on the roof, it gets smaller every single day, and to a point where even the person sitting across from you at breakfast is eating his Cheerios the wrong way. It's just going to piss you off and set you off, in a bad mood for the rest of the day. So, and everybody gets to that point. I'm sure even ground forces got to a certain point on their cycles and their deployments where just the littlest things would just, set them off, and it was just a bad day after that. And then, the next day could be one of the best days you've had that week or that month. Could be something small. Could be something that, for us, we loved it when the jets would come back and they were completely empty. And granted, that meant that we had some cleaning to do, but it also meant that we were supporting ground troops, and we didn't have to download any bombs or missiles and swap them out for something else. We could just immediately start loading out for the next day after we did some light cleaning of the bomb racks and whatnot. So, just to kind of circle back, I definitely say the people. I still keep in close contact with a number of people, and not just ones that were in my shop. Because I was a plane captain when I got sent to the line shack as soon as I got to my command, rather than going to the ordnance shop, I made some really good connections and some really good friends with people who were in the same boat as me. They're new out of school. They didn't get to go to their shops. You had to go to the line shack, earn your plane captain qualification, do a certain amount of time in that shop before you could go and be released to do the job that you were actually trained to do in the Navy. So, I kept in close contact with quite a few folks.
What was the worst part about being in? Or what was the straw that broke the camel's back? You're like, you know what, I just want to go home.
Operational tempo. It was high, to say the least, and not discounting anyone else's service or time in country or anything like that, but I never took a bullet. I never had anybody shooting at me. I never had those kind of circumstances, but there's literally nothing on the flight deck that can't kill you. So you're walking in your own minefield. It's just different. It's chaos, organized chaos. So you're in this heightened sense of awareness at all times, and that can get very stressful, as I'm sure you know. Being from ground forces, there's just that, when you're on patrol, I would assume you're just in this constant state of awareness, and, what's going on in front, both sides, and behind you. And it's the same thing working on the flight deck. It's being gone for long periods of time. It's confined quarters. Like I said, an aircraft carrier is the largest ship the Navy has, but it gets smaller every day on a 9 month deployment, and you've already been extended twice, that kind of thing. So it just, operational tempo was really what killed me. And I kind of had an idea when I first joined that I wasn't going to stay in for a second enlistment. And my recruiter, again, really set me up for, he created those expectations for me. He said, you're going to hate your first enlistment. He said, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You're going to hate it. You're going to be the lowest ranking person right off the bat, so you're going to get stuck with all the shit jobs, and it's not going to be fun. He said, you're going to have some great experiences, but he said, you're going to hate your job. He's like, I've known you for long enough. He said, you're a smart, intelligent guy, and it's going to just drive you crazy, the ineptitude of certain people in certain situations and how they're handled. So, yeah, I pretty much kind of knew going in that I wasn't going to stay in, but, I didn't want to shut that door completely. So I had an open mind for the first couple of years. And then when I realized what the operational tempo was like, I just said, you know what, 1 tour of duty is enough for me as far as enlistment goes. Our rotation, I wasn't going to get any shore duty unless I enlisted for like another 2 years before I even saw 1 year of sea duty. So, and that would have put me at 9.5 years in. And at that point, why get out at 9.5 years and it only takes 10 more and then you can retire with full benefits. So I just decided to not re-enlist and did my 5 years and got out.
You say you were on the East Coast, right?
West Coast,
The West Coast?
California. Mm-hmm.
So the area you guys typically patrol in, how far or how long would it take you to get to theater, like where you were supposed to be?
So we would leave out of San Diego. We'd either pull into Pearl Harbor, Hawaii for a couple of days to get supplies, or we would just breeze right past and get supplies as we're driving, as we're floating past Hawaii. That's actually when we took on all of our live ordnance. Is off the coast of Hawaii. Between Hawaii and the United States, you're not supposed to have large quantities of explosive ordnance for safety reasons. So everything the Navy does is pretty much put in blood, or because someone got hurt or killed for something. So they're pretty strict on their ordnance handling procedures. So we wouldn't actually get our unload of bombs and missiles and 20 Mike until we were past Hawaii. So it takes. I'm sure if we were to just go straight there, it would probably take us about a week, maybe a little less, a little more, I don't know. Because on the way out to your duty station to relieve the carrier that's already been on station, you're making a couple of diplomatic port calls. So, you're in Hong Kong, you're in Singapore, you're in Phuket, Thailand, you're in Guam, on the way to the coast of Pakistan. So, yeah, I'd say probably about a week. If we were just to go straight there, but we never did, and we never came straight home. We would kind of do the same rotation back, except we'd hit other ports like Dubai. Dubai was a good one. So just kind of depends.
On the way to and from, or I guess even when you were in your patrol area, is that what you call it?
Yep.
Was it smooth sailing? Did you guys ever hit like these big storms or?
We were pretty good at sailing around big storms, and especially when you get into the Gulf of Oman, there's really not a lot of storms to worry about. It's pretty dry, unfortunately. Even though there's a ton of humidity in the Gulf of Oman, it's pretty horrendous. You're talking 110 degrees plus 90% humidity, but it'll never rain. So you sweat a lot because you're also wearing 2-3 layers. Plus, you're working with hot jet exhaust all the time, so it could easily be experiencing temperatures between 100 to 140, 150 degrees. Just not extensive periods of time for the the higher temperatures, but you could definitely lose some pounds. And I've routinely lost anywhere from 20 to 35 pounds every deployment. So can't tell now. Obviously, I haven't been on deployment in a while.
Been a minute or two. What was the most memorable part of your service?
So when I was not deployed, when we were back on shore, I volunteered to be one of the squadron representatives to the Color Guard Honor Guard for the base, and each squadron and each department, I guess, on the base is supposed to contribute to personnel. And that ensured that if there was a change of command or something at your squadron or at your command, you could have that benefit, I guess you could say. So I did quite a few funerals, mostly veterans from the Lemoore, California area in Kings County, California. but did a number of active duty ones as well. Army and Marines were the most common active duty ones that I did. Those were pretty emotional, even for us, especially for me. I've only presented one flag in my entire life, and it was probably one of the worst experiences I've ever had in my life because I was crying my eyes out. And you're supposed to keep military bearing at all times, especially when you're presenting a flag, in particular. But just the situation that it was and the people that it was affecting, it affected me a lot more than I thought. So everything that we did, it kind of, the whole picture, the big picture really comes to light in those moments of life and death. And it motivates you. It makes you want to do your job better. It makes you want to do everything in your power to make sure that jets fly, make sure that bombs drop where they're supposed to, make sure they're not taking out any civilians, that kind of thing. It just makes you want to be better at your job and just be better all around. That was probably the most memorable day, on a serious note. But on a fun note, the funnest day that I had in the Navy was when we crossed the equator, and we went through the initiation to become shellbacks. So that tradition dates back to the British Navy, back in the days of wooden ships and steel men, as they used to say. So if you go below the equator, you drop below the equator, you get to transform yourself from a slimy pollywog into a trusty shellback. And there's an initiation process of that. And it's just, stupid games. But for me, it was a day off. I hadn't earned my plane captain qualification just yet. I was still a trainee. So it was on my first deployment. And at that rank, and at that level, you're really getting the worst of the worst jobs. So for me, it was fun to crawl around on deck in green-dyed seawater, getting sprayed with seawater, and blowing out pad eyes, which is where you would anchor points where you would chain the jets. Just doing stupid fun games like that, and then you finally get initiated by King Neptune himself. And from that point on, you're known as a shellback, and then you can initiate other polywogs to become shellbacks in ceremonies after yours. So that was probably the funnest day that I had in the Navy. And I wish I had the opportunity to bring some pictures in, because it's fun. Each part of the ship participates in some way or another. So there's always, you're going through one particular space, and, they might make you sing row, row, row your boat 16 times as you march around that compartment before you can leave. Just, fun, stupid stuff like that. Just kind of just make it interesting.
So you can bring those pictures later, and we can get them added to the clip.
Okay, great.
If you have pictures.
I have to get them printed, but yeah.
Well, I think you could just bring the digital, or get.
Okay, I can do that.
Because they're going to go. It'd probably be easier for whoever does it.
Yeah, probably.
So you weren't married when you were in the service, right? You got married out of the service.
So I wasn't married the first two deployments, but I was married the last one. I got married June 16th of 2010. We were actually planning a fairly large celebration in Leavenworth, and then I can't remember what happened to the ship that we were supposed to be relieving, but something happened and they weren't able to deploy. So that excelled our deployment date up by a few months, which completely obliterated every wedding plan that we had. So we ended up getting married in the courthouse in Hanford, California, in the Kings County Courthouse. And then I took a long weekend for the honeymoon and just kind of hung out with her family. And she supported me the last deployment for sure. And we were dating, I guess you could say, for my second deployment. So she would send me care packages even then. So those little tokens are always nice to get. real toilet paper and snack food that you can't get in the ship store. Maybe your favorite kind of potato chips, grandma's cookies, that kind of thing. So care packages are always nice. And she sent me about one every other week. So I was getting a pretty steady supply of stuff from home, and it was great.
So you're saying that the Navy did not accommodate your wedding plans?
No, oddly enough, yeah, they didn't really give two shits about Petty Officer Coffee's wedding plans.
So you kind of covered a little bit, but what was communication like between you and her while you were deployed?
So it kind of goes back to the River City comment. It just depends on what level of security they're exercising for that day. So it could be, for the most part, we had outgoing email. For the most part, there were only a few times that we didn't, but for the most part, we had outgoing email almost every day. So, we'd exchange emails, obviously, 2-3 times a day if possible. Facebook messages as possible. We just kind of created our own way of communicating back and forth. Yeah.
Snail mail was pretty consistent, though, right?
No, not really.
No.
If we were bouncing around between a port to a different port to being on station to out chopping to go back home or whatever, it wasn't always. Sometimes I would get a package that was 2 months old, whereas the week before I'd gotten one that was only 3 weeks old. So it just kind of depended on where we were when something was mailed as to when we would actually get it.
How would you say that being in the Navy and being deployed has changed you as a person, or as a man, or as a husband?
As a person, it every level of service changes you in some way or another. And again, not discounting anyone else's experiences or anything like that, but for me personally, it was difficult to transition out, and it affected me that much because, I didn't have that close-knit community around me of my brothers and sisters in arms when I got out for support to, talk about, the day you had yesterday or, what you did, the night before, that kind of thing. Just the conversations you would have on a daily basis and just that support factor, you just didn't have that. So that was difficult for me to transition away from. And then, as a husband, it definitely made me appreciate my wife's sacrifices very much because I know that it was not easy on her at all, particularly in May of 2011. We were out of communication for a couple of weeks, and I can go into that later as to why. But you really appreciate the little things, and at the same time, it's also the little things that can just set you off. Could be long lines at a grocery store. Could be somebody cutting you off in traffic. Could be the person in front of you after you've decided to run a yellow light. They decided to not run a yellow light. It could be anything like that, something small. And it just kind of distracts you, or it can distract you from whatever good might be happening that day. So there's definitely that to consider as well.
So why were you guys out of communication for so long?
So as you'll remember, in May of 2011, SEAL Team 6 went in and shot bin Laden and pulled his body out. My aircraft carrier, the USS Carl Vinson, was the ship that they flew his remains out to. We kind of knew something was going on because we had left the day before to start heading home. We call that out chopping. So we had already started out chopping, and then sometime in the middle of the night, for us, I think for you guys here, it would have been mid-afternoon, possibly, or very early evening, I think. We turned around and started heading unclassified speed back towards shore, and nobody really knew it was going, but it woke me up in the middle of the night because that's how sharp of a turn that we made and started heading back. When I got to work at 1000 that morning, I had already seen on the news that he had been killed, and that it had been us that had done it. So we knew we had something to do with it. We just weren't sure. So as you can imagine, conspiracy theories were rife that morning. With no communications, outbound communications happening. The only two people that had access to outbound communications was the rear admiral on the boat, who was in charge of the carrier strike group, and then the captain of the aircraft carrier. Those were the only two people that actually had outgoing communications. So it turned out SEAL Team 6 flew his remains out in a V-22 Osprey, which is a turboprop half helicopter kind of a thing. I believe you might have even flown in one, possibly, depending on where they were in the development process when you were in. But they shut down the flight deck, they shut down the hangar bay. Everybody pretty much had to just kind of remain in place where they were at until notified otherwise. But they did ask for a select few to assist with the at-sea burial, and they handpicked those individuals. One of the individuals selected was actually a sister of one of the sailors in my squadron. So trying to be as classified as possible here because I did have to sign an NDA. The actual burial at sea did not go as announced in the media for a reason. His location that we buried him at sea was completely classified because they did not want that particular spot in the ocean to be some sort of a shrine or a religious spot of gathering. They wanted him to be completely anonymous, which I totally agree with. Yeah, I think that's probably about all I can say about it without violating my NDA. If you want to know more, I'm sure there's some books written by a Navy SEAL or two or three somewhere where they got to say what actually happened. But
surely not by those silent professionals.
No, absolutely not. So it was, we weren't able to have any outbound communications for around a week and a half after that particular day. So she understood what was going on because as soon as she heard that we had actually killed him and that they were bringing him out to my carrier, she understood immediately what was going on and understood, I won't be able to answer any of her emails, but I could get her emails. That was that was probably one of the worst things is everybody was reading emails from their loved ones and their friends, and they couldn't respond to any of them because they didn't have access. Mm-hmm. Like I said, only two people on the entire ship had access. So it was just it was an interesting time. Yeah, it was interesting just kind of being a part of history, even just a very small part, and kind of hearing firsthand, or I guess secondhand, kind of exactly what went down was, it made me feel pretty good. It made me feel that we had avenged the couple thousand souls from 9/11.
Mm-hmm. Which aircraft carrier were you on then?
For that deployment, I was on the USS Carl Vinson, CVN 70.
When you were on the Ronald Reagan?
Correct, my first deployment, yep, in 2008.
During that period, were there any new taxes? It's a joke.
Yeah, took me a second.
So, what year did you get out?
2011, December of 2011.
do you think that your time in service has changed you as a person, as far as, I mean, obviously it, provided education benefits, but as far as like, going out and pursuing an education, or how you might be in your career field, or home?
Yeah, it has changed me. There's a certain level of anticipation when you get out that they make you believe, when you're in, that, you're going to get first choice, when it comes to, if there's several people that are applying for the same job, you're a veteran, you get first choice if you're qualified, that kind of thing. It was frustrating to experience the polar opposite of that for the couple years after I got out, before I kind of realized that I was always going to be starting at the bottom, regardless of my veteran status, unless I just bit the bullet and got education, went to college. So, it took a couple of really bad jobs, including one at a VA hospital, washing hospital laundry. And as you can imagine, that's the very epitome of a shitty job. I actually caught a couple of intestinal infections based off of that, and was very sick 2 different times in the 1.5 years that I was there. And the second time was what kind of prompted me to start looking for other employment. So, yeah, it can set you up. Being a veteran, it can definitely set you up for success. But if you don't actually put in the work and you rely solely on your status, you're going to be sorely disappointed and sorely mistaken.
What else would you like to tell us about your time in service, or just really thing in general? Because this is more about your story than it is just a service story.
One of the things I forgot to mention at the very beginning of this is when you asked me kind of what was prompting me to join. One of my best friends was joining the Navy. She was kind of in the same boat that I was in, except that she'd gone to college right out of high school. So she'd had a couple of really bad semesters. Nothing was really working out for her. And at the time, her stepdad was a Vietnam veteran. He was a full colonel, retired. And I believe he's West Point class of 63 or 64, one of the two. And Roger Lee, Colonel Roger Lee, he was a great guy, and he was a very quiet, positive influence on both of us joining the military. Particularly me, even though that was her stepdad. He really filled the shoes of a father figure for me, very much so. So we had some really good conversations. He never abruptly told me, hey, you'd be great for the military. It was just mostly just stories. I'd ask him what he would have done in a certain situation, and he had an example, already ready. So it was. I kind of got a good idea in my head that if I played my cards right and I stayed out of trouble, and was just a good sailor, it would set me up for success later on. So,
if you had it to do over again, would you do things the same? Would you
I'd call the Air Force recruiter back.
Would you join the service? Would you join the same branch? Would you pick the same job?
Everybody wants to say, I am who I am today because of my choices in the past. Having lived my life up to now and knowing what I know, I'd kind of like to experience what I don't know. So would I have joined the military? Absolutely. Still, like I said, I probably would choose a different branch, or possibly even a better job. I don't test well on paper, so when I took the ASVAB, I initially got a pretty low score. So I had a fairly limited amount of jobs that were available to me in the Navy. It just so happened that I barely qualified for aviation ordnance, just kind of based on the more technical skills and math skills they say a dumb orty is a dumb orty, and that's just not true because I may not test well, but I can write papers and I can do all sorts of creative writing and things like that. So it's definitely not true. We're all dumb orties. But there are some knuckle dragging mouth breathers out there, just like there are infantrymen and women and every rate, every job, every branch of the military. But yeah, I definitely would have joined, and if I had gone Navy, I would have picked a different job just to get another experience. Because, like I said, I lived my life now. I like to know what I don't know.
But it didn't stop at the Navy, right? You went on to finish your education?
Absolutely, yeah. So I enrolled in Johnson County Community College for the fall 2014 semester. So I'd been out for about 2.5 years, roughly, by the time I started my enrollment process. Came on board. First semester was kind of a mixed bag for me. Being homeschooled my entire life did not exactly set me up for success in a classroom setting, for sure. So there was a pretty steep learning curve just based on that. But had some great support from the Veterans Club here on campus, and actually became an officer of the club myself. Had a good time leading, had a good time connecting with other people, and really learning that, and kind of, I guess, relearning that service is sacrifice. So yeah, I might not have been able to study as much for a particular test, but I was able to just, be a listening ear to someone who just had a particular story they wanted to tell, or, had had a bad day and just wanted somebody to talk to, that kind of thing. So, being a club officer definitely puts you in that position more so than anyone else that might come into the Veterans Lounge. But those experiences I wouldn't trade for anything. They were integral in getting me to where I am today. And then I transferred all of my credits to Park University. Mm-hmm. Started there in the summer of 2016, 20 semester. And then transferred some credits back to get my associate's degree here. So I got that, and then retransferred everything back to Park for my bachelor's degree. I got a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration in Logistics. So definitely put myself in a great place for success. And once I kind of learned to let life happen to me, not to try to make every opportunity on my own, just to kind of relax, just, take it easy, I guess you could say, but, don't be so overeager to do something great that, you miss out on something else. So once I kind of had that mindset, I investigated a couple different jobs on campus at Park University. They took a chance and they hired someone with no real finance experience in the finance department. So I was a work study in the accounts payable department for 2 years, and during those 2 years, our office was right next to the CFO's office, who was an Army veteran himself. He was a finance officer in the Army. So I really got to connect with him, made some great memories with him, conversations, and again, just kind of being open to things that were happening. And because I am who I am, I got bored with the little bit of responsibility that I had. I told my boss, I said, hey, if I'm going to be here for 3 hours a day, 4 days a week, I was like, can I get something else to do? Because I was like, I'm getting done with this stuff really fast. And so by the end of the 2 years, I was actually doing probably the job of part to a full-time employee in the finance department, but I was still technically a student aide. So I was definitely motivated to do the best that I could, not only for that department, but also I saw how it helped the university too. So it was kind of a win-win for everybody. And it really came to fruition for me at my graduation party, because my boss at the time, she came to my party and offered me a full-time job for the summer while I looked for full-time employment elsewhere. So I had that bridge income from May of 2018 to August of 2018 when I found permanent employment at the company that I'm in now. So not having those particular experiences from my past would not have granted me the opportunities that I had then at that time, and possibly even not today.
I mean, and you still continue to serve in some capacities, right? I mean,
Yeah, so I'm a life member of the VFW. The particular post that I'm at is the post sponsor for the Veterans Club here at Johnson County Community College. So I'm the liaison between the post and the Veterans Club here. So it's my job to try and make sure that there's always support from the VFW for the student veterans, regardless of membership in any veterans organization. We're here for the veterans. We do more for veterans than anybody else. So my number one priority is making sure that you guys have the support that you need from us if there's anything we can do. So yeah, I definitely still serve in that capacity for sure. And then taking that role to the next level, I'm also the district officer for that particular role as well. So I've got a number of universities and community colleges in my district. So I liaise with their particular posts or veterans clubs and make sure that they get the support that they need. Again, regardless of membership, I don't care if they're VFW members or not.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to be there to support student veterans because not everybody had the support that I had, and not everybody has the support that I had. My wife had a great job, so she was able to really support us to the point where I didn't really have to have a great job while I was in school. I still had some part-time gigs. Like I said, I was a student worker in the finance department at Park University, but for the most part, I would not have been able to experience, what I did experience without her support. So, knowing how expensive and costly and the time sacrifice that college is, I definitely want to make sure that student veterans are taken care of and they can really focus on the task at hand.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all I got. You guys have any Hail Marys for me back there? No? Anything else you'd like to?
No, thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, man, thanks for coming out. We really appreciate it. It's kind of nice to have a JCCC alum come back in and.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. This is great. Yeah, definitely wanted to give some perspective. Being landlocked in Kansas, there's not a lot of opportunity to talk to Navy guys,
Mm-hmm.
particularly ones that were on like aircraft carriers. So wanted to make sure that squadron folks had their story
Mm-hmm.
out there as well. So
Well, it's kind of cool because you're the second aircraft carrier person. The first one was on an aircraft carrier in Vietnam.
oh right,
Yeah.
Wow.
So, you probably remember Larry. He used to be the mail guy for the Veteran Services Office.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, he was on a Navy aircraft carrier.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I worked right next to him in the warehouse when I.
Yeah, right, the warehouse.
Yeah.
So it's really cool hearing, the two different time periods.
Yeah,
of
that
the-
was
of
back when the
same-
Navy was fun. You could have beards and walk around the flight deck shirtless and all that good stuff.
Mhm. In fact, that's why I asked about the storm because they had some pretty hardcore storms in there.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I guess I never really answered that one. So the storm thing, I really only remember like two really bad ones because for the most part we sailed around them as best as we possibly could. But one of them just ended up chasing us. There's certain wind restrictions. Obviously, you can't fly if there's certain knot per hour or miles per hour, but knots are the nautical equivalent to a mile per hour. I think it's 1.3 or 1.4 miles per hour is 1 knot. I want to say it was a sustained like 55, 60 knot wind over the bow. So we had to put extra chains on the jets, and they raised up the jet blast deflectors, those little platforms that come up behind a jet that you'll see when they're launching off. they raise those, they pull all of the jets back behind those, and then they raise those two up. It just kind of helps a little bit to kind of dissipate the wind, and then you just kind of ride it out in your berthing or in your shop or wherever, because you can't really walk very well, from space to space.
Right.
And even as big as an aircraft carrier is, I mean, a 15 to 20 foot seas, that's going to affect us for sure. But I think that particular storm, I think we had 20 to 25 foot seas. It was, it got a little sporty for a few hours, but it was, at the same time, it was kind of cool. I mean, you can't really call yourself a sailor if you've never sailed through a storm,
Right.
Yeah, and then the second one was kind of the same, not quite as bad, but it was bad enough that we had to do the extra chains and tie everything down in the shop and all that kind of stuff. Oddly enough, I was never one of those people that got seasick, even in a berthing where I had no windows, so I didn't have a frame of reference as to what direction, what angle we were floating or whatever. Some people got pretty violently seasick, and to me, it was kind of funny. It's like, why would you join the Navy if you know you get seasick or if you know you get motion sickness? Because there's no point in joining the Navy if you want to just stay on shore. That's not the job of a sailor. A sailor's job is to be at sea with the ship. So I just always thought that was odd. But yeah, one of the coolest things about that is, as you're going out towards the bow to get your aircraft so that you can bring them back, to chain them down and everything. The wind is just blowing so hard that it's actually knocking you back, and you're carrying at least 100 pounds in chains, 10-pound chains. And once you put the chains down, it was really cool to kind of put your arms out and like lean as far forward as you could. And I think I probably got about that far from my head from the flight deck, and I wasn't falling down. It was supporting me. So it was pretty surreal experience. I'd never experienced wind like that, even being from Kansas, Tornado Alley. It was cool. So yeah, that's my storm story.
Yeah. I don't think the type of storms you see out there can really be appreciated by someone who's never been there. No, and
coastal towns will know what I'm talking about, because I mean they experience the same kinds of things as well. But you have a harbor to pull into. You have a safe place. There is no safe place in the middle of the ocean. The safe place is on your ship, so you better make damn well that the ship doesn't sink. So and you don't lose any equipment or any body, because if somebody falls off the ship, won't be able to launch a helicopter to get you. So it's basically you're already a person down. You know what I mean? So we had a few people fall off the ship, actually, a couple different times. A couple during flight operations, so there was already a helo flying around. They were able to get him right away. And then the other one was a plane captain from one of our sister squadrons that was stationed with us at Lemoore. He was working on a jet that was TOW, or tail over water, and he was working on the back end of the jet, and caught a gust of wind over the bow, and he fell from the flight deck, about 9 feet above the flight deck, because that's about how high it is up on top of the jet to the ocean. And that was, so you're talking like 100, 110, 115 feet, something like that. So, yeah, it was, it's not a pleasant experience. And, they gave him a couple days to, not have to be up on the flight deck, but he rebounded pretty quickly. But he said that was probably one of the scariest things he'd ever experienced in his life. And I get it, because when you're working on night shift in the middle of the ocean, there's no lights. You're running dark, so it's you've got a little red lamp above your cranial, or maybe like a blue tinted flashlight, but there's no white lights, no bright lights, so it's really difficult to see, and that's why you have to have really good vision and good hearing, at least to start off with, on a flight deck to be able to function properly. Night check, it just adds so many more safety issues, because you just can't see. You're tripping over chains, that tying down support equipment or jets. So we call those shin splinters, and then moving jets around, like not even under power, just the yellow shirts or the aviation bosun's mate handlers, the yellow shirts. They're moving aircraft around to prep it for the next day's flight schedule. One unfortunate individual from the squadron that shared a hangar with us in Lemoore, he was an AO like myself. He was trying to kind of get a little head start on some de-arming procedures, and the jet was in motion, and he wasn't paying attention, and neither was the wing walkers or the yellow shirt himself. And he unfortunately ended up having to have his leg amputated because they ran over it in the opposite direction. So his leg bent, normally your knee would bend this way. It bent the back way. And it was so bad that they had to amputate mid-thigh. Saved his life, but couldn't save his leg. And it was, that was probably the most horrific sound I've ever heard in my life, was hearing that, and then hearing his screams, and then hearing his screams a second time, like 30 seconds later, when they pulled the jet off of his leg. So that part was sad, because not only did he end up losing his leg, but to kind of add insult to injury, he had just bought some high-powered Japanese motorcycle, like a Hayabusa or something like that, some massive motorcycle that he immediately basically had to turn around and sell. So didn't really get to enjoy that, because his plan was to pay it off while he was on deployment so that he would own it free and clear when he got back. And yeah.
You say a flight captain, are you talking about an 03 as opposed to an 06 captain?
Flight captain?
Or you were saying something about like the captain that fell. You said you specified a certain kind of captain. So I thought maybe you were talking about
plane captain. So a plane captain is, the Air Force calls them crew chiefs, but in the Air Force, being a crew chief is your actual job. Whereas in the Navy, a plane captain is a temporary assigned duty to where they send you to what's called the line shack, and that's short for the flight line shack. So the flight line is where all the birds are parked outside. So as a trainee, your main focus is to get plane captain qualified, and that's learning all the launch procedures, the launch hand signals, basic safety, basic flight deck, walking on the flight deck, that kind of thing, basic flight deck qualified. That's your main focus as a trainee. And then as a plane captain, you kind of, if you don't own a bird already, you have one assigned to you at the beginning of your shift, and that's your bird for the day. I was lucky enough to have a bird, my own bird. I had my name on it. I even remember the BUNO on it, the Bureau of Navy. Let's see, it was 164686. It was a F-18 Charlie. So the last single seaters before the Super Hornets came out a few years ago. So very proud to own that jet, have my name on it. That was a pretty cool feeling. So you got to do at least a deployment. At least in my squadron, you had to do at least one deployment in the line shack before you could actually go to your shop. So I obviously was not super thrilled at that, because I felt I'd gone through all this training and all this school, and the very first thing I'm going to do is wash aircraft, launch aircraft. Like, are you kidding me? So that was just one thing I kind of had to overcome kind of right off the bat. I clearly never really have a choice, especially when you're in E3. So, that was, but once I got plane captain qualified, I definitely took a lot of pride in it. It was my bird, and it was my responsibility to make sure that the bird was safe for flight. The pilot could see out of the cockpit. Make sure that he understood exactly what I was telling him to do in pre-launch and recovery, post-recovery signals, making sure everything was crisp and clean and ready to go. And I took a lot of pride in that, but I was definitely very happy and very excited to actually get to the ordnance shop for my second deployment and get out of the line, as most folks who have spent any amount of time in the line shack would agree.
Well, I can't think of anything else. Can you?
No, not off the top of my head, no.
Awesome. Well, thank you, sir.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you coming. Yeah.